I'm interested in sharing something that I learned actually in my therapy session. So for those of you who don't know, I go to therapy once a week. Therapy is not cheap, but I'm very lucky to be having the price that I have. And I happen to have an Asian American woman. I've talked a lot on my channel and also in therapy about how I've always just find it very difficult writing that line between self-care and, doing everything I can to resist and to, fight for social justice. I've talked a lot about my fear of how I'm gonna get to a point where I'm lazy, but I'm like telling myself that it's just for self-care. And I've talked about how exhausted I've been just all the time since the inauguration. And my therapist was basically saying like, wow, like these sounds like a lot of judgments and like a lot of like really high standards that you're putting on yourself. I think that's how I've always functioned, like putting a lot of standards on myself and also placing a lot of standards on the world, and how that usually ends up with a lot of disappointment for me because, I'm so Virgo that I just end up placing these impossible standards on people and the world and myself that I can't meet. And, I've been working a lot on being nicer to myself. When it comes to like participating in the resistance against our president, it's just been really hard to like actively take care of myself, because one of the ways that I primarily took care of myself in the past was with yoga, and I've been trying really hard to find a new place, and I think I finally found a good place to go to, so that's definitely making me feel a lot better. My therapist was asking me if I think that my high standards for myself might have come from my upbringing. And so, I was talking about bullying, and I was talking about my means of survival during school when I just felt really unsafe as a non-white queer person, even though I didn't want to admit to myself. And then I started getting into the way that my mom would always talk to me and my sister about like high standards for ourselves. I think I've always carried this, and I've really internalized this phrase that I think I've heard my mom say before. I was asking her like this kind of rhetorical question about like, being good enough and all of that stuff, because I think that's a narrative that a lot of kids shows in my time kind of tried to place on kids, is like being good enough, being good enough as long as you try your best. My mom kind of countered that point by saying there's always room to do better. People can always do better. You can always do better. Your situation can always be better. That was kind of an important moment for me in my therapy, because I rarely have like breakthroughs like that. Usually I just talk and she makes me feel better. Last week was a therapy session where I had like the most like realizations about, where a lot of my thoughts are coming from. And one of them had to do with that answer from my mom. On one hand, I think it's a very noble, it's a very optimistic way of looking at the world. People can always be better. There's always improvements to be made. It's always important to have ambition, to push yourself, because, you have infinite potential as a human being. And I think that's so beautiful. I'm a very neurotic person, and so I can twist that mindset from optimism to like just being very, very harsh on myself. It's kind of like combining that mindset of like, you can always do better, with this mindset of the only thing that you can control is yourself and be the change that you want to see. I think my neuroticism kind of perverts that idea into like just being really, really tough on myself. One of the breakthroughs that I had in therapy last week was the way that I make myself take care of myself, the way that I make myself clean my room, the way that I make myself go to yoga, to exercise, to get a massage or anything like that. I realized that a lot of it comes from like a place of shaming myself into doing those things, like telling myself that, oh, like you're not going to be happy if you do this, like you need to do this, or like, oh, you're going to be like so disappointed with yourself if you don't do this. It's so weird realizing that trying to do all of these positive things for myself, it has to come from a place of essentially tiger momming myself, which is a term that I use in therapy. It's not the most constructive to like basically be like, cracking the whip on myself in order to make myself do good things for myself. Like using shame on myself, it was a big way to like motivate myself to do things, because I was such a lost and aimless person back then. For a while during therapy, my therapist would always remind me, and I would always try to remind myself to be kinder to myself. I thought I was, but I wasn't. I thought I was being really kind to myself by, I guess, making myself do all of these self-care acts for myself, but the way that I was like talking to myself in my head, it wasn't being kind to myself. And it's so frightening to me how blind I was to that before. Your brain is really, really smart, but it can also be just really, really fucking stupid sometimes, to quote another round. Especially for people who are participating in the resistance in some sort of way. It's more and more important to take care of yourself and to not shame yourself into taking care of yourself, and to develop the skills that when you have like a very negative thought about yourself, knowing when to identify it, acknowledging it will help strip it of its power a little bit. I'm obviously still working on this because it was just last week, but I've already found myself like catching myself more and more often being like, let's try to think of it like, you know, you'll be really happy if you complete this task. Not like you're going to regret that you didn't do this, and like, you're not going to be a good person if you don't do this. There's just so much bullshit that we carry from our childhood that we don't even realize that we're carrying. I can't express just how grateful I am that I have the means and the resources to have access to a therapist that can help me. I guess I would just encourage you to really examine the way that you talk to yourself, you know, in those silent moments. There's so much to that statement that I think we don't internalize enough. And I think there's a lot, I think that we just hear that so much that we just automatically think like, oh yeah, I've heard that a million times. Like, I'm doing it. Like, I got this. Let's move on to the next thing. But I'd be interested in knowing if you've had similar realizations, or if there's anything that you are working actively to unlearn or deconstruct about yourself. I think the cause that I would like to highlight this week is just contacting your representative. There are multiple services now that will give you reminders and give you like really well-researched recommendations about what you can call your representatives, or like who you can call to help make an impact on something, to resist, of course. And the one that I particularly follow is Daily Action. I've mentioned it before in links in the description, but I just wanted to actually verbally say it. Every day you get a text message saying, call your representative or your senator about this issue. And with the text reminder, you can click on a link and it'll take you to their Facebook page, and it'll link to a post where there's just like a little bit more in-depth information that you can provide to your senator and your representative. Also watch I Am Not Your Negro. It's fucking great movie. Cool, that's all I've got for today. Thank you so much for watching. I really love and appreciate you. Please like and subscribe to the channel. All that good stuff, you know the drill. I'll see you later. I'll see you next week, okay? Bye. Stay safe.